Tequila and Lobster have in common? They were the target of some recent high-profile, highly publicized, and very expensive cargo heists. In fact, the average value of cargo thefts jumped last year 36% compared to the year before, according to CargoNet's recent numbers. And both who's behind these thefts and their methods become more sophisticated. To talk about these trends and what trucking companies can do to protect themselves, I talked to Scott Cornell, who has decades of investigating cargo theft. He is vice president at LogistIQ Insurance, and he's chair of the Transported Asset Protection Association. That's a nonprofit that develops cargo theft prevention standards and works closely with law enforcement and industry. Scott, welcome to HDT Talks Trucking.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me this morning. I appreciate it. It'll be fun to have the conversation.
Scott, you've been in the industry for a while, working with trucking companies, working on cargo security. In fact, last year you wrote an article for us about, for heavy-duty trucking, about cargo theft. So you mentioned the changes we've seen in cargo theft over the past few years. Talk a little bit about that.
Cargo theft in the United States fundamentally changed between 2020 and 2022. So, I've been doing cargo theft investigations for over 30 years in supply chain security. And prior to 2020, it was really conducted by these small, pretty unsophisticated regional crews. Quite often they were family-based, meaning you'd see, fathers, sons, uncles, cousins, right? They were usually, anywhere from 8 to 15-ish in size. And they did primarily straight theft, right? Straight theft is when you go straight out to the freight and you steal it physically. You're physically on location stealing it. And their methods weren't really groundbreaking. They were always clever, but we knew who they were. If you were doing an investigation and you pulled video and you saw a certain person, you say, okay, well, that's so-and-so. I mean, we're familiar with them, right? It seems odd to say that, right? But it was quite true, right? We'd go, oh, that's so-and-so, and that's this crew, and this crew moves their freight this way, and things like that. But they only had the ability to move so much freight. They could sell a load here and there. They could sell stuff online. They would sell stuff to flea markets. They would try and pass some loads off as rejected loads and sell it to small stores and things like that. 2020 to 2022, cargo theft in the United States went international, and a good portion of cargo theft being conducted in the United States right now is driven by these very large, sophisticated, organized crime rings that are operating from dozens of different countries. And their preferred method is strategic theft, which is the use of deception. Always starts with the use of deception to trick a member of the supply chain into giving them the freight unknowingly but willingly. The double brokering scam is probably the most common one, where they'll steal the identity of a trucking company, they'll pretend to be that trucking company, they make it through the freight broker's vetting process, they get booked on the load, they then turn around and pretend to be a freight broker. They hire a legitimate trucking company to go pick up the freight for them, because keep in mind, they're overseas. They're far away, right? So they can't go pick it up. So they hire a legitimate trucking company to go pick it up, and that legitimate trucking company has no idea that they're being involved in anything nefarious. They, these organized rings, they know the language, they understand the supply chain, they know how to talk to the drivers, they send the paperwork, they have the paperwork because they got booked on the load, so everything looks legitimate, and they'll send that load to a cross dock. And that's where they begin to launder the freight, meaning it goes in as, Acme televisions on the bill of lading, and it comes out the other side as electronics. And then maybe they take it to another cross dock or a warehouse, and it goes in as electronics, and it comes out as FAK, freight of all kinds. And now, in essence, they've laundered the freight, because as we know, as advanced as the supply chain gets, there are still some archaic aspects to it, which the bill of lading is the most glaring example, right? So if it says it's freight of all kinds on the bill of lading, that's what everybody thinks is in the truck, freight of all kinds. And so they essentially launder it on paper.
But, and it never gets to where it was supposed to go in the first place.
Correct. It never gets to where it's supposed to go. And a lot of the freight that's stolen now is being moved overseas. And that's another big change, right? So when people like myself or my peers or others in the industry have a smaller window quite often than they used to recover this stuff. The strategic theft went from less than 5%, prior to 2020, less than 5% of all cargo theft, to now I think the latest CargoNet numbers have it, flattening out at somewhere around 33 or 34% of all cargo theft, which is a huge increase. Between 2022 and 2024, cargo theft in general, according to CargoNet, went up 93%, but strategic theft went up 1,475%.
Wow.
And that, strategic theft is targeted towards that intermediary space, the freight brokers. That part of the supply chain really wasn't used to being targeted for cargo theft. So they weren't quite prepared. They've done, I think a lot of that space has done a really good job catching up and trying to defend themselves and the supply chain now. But when it initially happened, a lot of people didn't see it coming and weren't prepared for it. So it's really changed the game here in the U.S. This ability to be anywhere and target freight anywhere has seen cargo theft really seep into all parts of the United States. It's all over the country now. So it doesn't matter if you're in Wyoming or Iowa or Nebraska, cargo theft is coming.
And I understand that cyber theft has gotten a hand in this as well.
Yeah, so in that strategic category, one of the other changes we've seen is it's not just one or two methods, right? So, strategic theft really jumped on the scene between 2010, 2013, and it was really just identity theft and fictitious pickups. But as we sit here today, there's probably 20 to 25 different methods in that strategic theft category. And phishing emails and social engineering emails are a big part of that. That's something that a year and a half ago, we were seeing it occasionally, and now it's every day, all day that the supply chain is dealing with. Is this a legitimate email? Do I click on this? Do I not? And so that email phishing, there's vishing attacks, there's all sorts of this cyber-related methods, and a lot of it is easy to spot, and I'll get that commentary sometimes from people. Well, they're not that hard to spot, but
If
my
what you're
pushback on
looking
that
for.
is they only have to get it right once, right? If they're using technology, if they're using AI to create these emails and just blast them out, thousands of times a day or something like that, they only need to get it right once.
And then the social engineering, that is more like relationships with somebody. Like they think it's their boss or somebody that's trying to get them to do something.
Yeah, well, they'll send an email from a familiar load board, right? It looks like it's coming from a familiar load board, and they'll say, click on this and, update your password or something like that. And they actually play on the fact that cargo theft is bad, right? So they'll send an email that says, hey, due to recent cargo theft attacks and all this other, you need to reset your password. And you're like, oh, yep, yeah, we know all about the cargo theft. And you click on that, and it will actually take you to a cloned website. So you actually think you're going to the website that you're familiar with, but you're going to a bogus website that's just going to put a Trojan virus in your computer, track your keystrokes, have your password. And we've actually seen incidents where they actually get access to a company's email account. They will create an additional email, almost like they're a new employee at that place. And then they start sending out emails, and they look very official. And so if you're on the other end of that email and it looks absolutely legitimate because you're getting the email from an actual...
Right, yeah, you don't look at it like, look at the email address and it's some weird email address. When you look sort of behind where it's actually coming from. The cargo theft issue has gotten some public attention in the past year with a couple of really high-profile heists. There was the Tequila heist last year, Sammy Hagar and Guy Fieri's brand, and there was a recent lobster bust I've seen some media about. A couple things I've noticed on these, they're spoofing the location. I mean, we've got all this visibility on these high-value loads these days with tracking and all this stuff, but they're actually making it look like the truck is somewhere it's not. So that seems like another factor that maybe is a newer tactic.
Yeah, it's been going on for a couple of years. Any tracking is better than no tracking, most of the time, right? But if you're depending heavily on a phone-based tracking, then you really better make sure that you've picked the right person and you haven't picked a bad guy, because obviously the bad guy is either going to turn that tracking off almost immediately because they never had good intent, or they're going to spoof that location, right? If you're using hard tracking devices, meaning you're using small covert tracking in your cargo, the bad guys are not unknowledgeable. They're very savvy. I talk about this all the time in front of the industry. They watch what we do. They learn every day and understand what we do. And so we've seen several cases where they'll use what's called a sniffer to find a tracking device in a load, or they just know where to look, and they'll take that tracking device and, as an example, if it has light alerts on it and things like that, they'll take it to a really dark place, they'll put it in a paint can, they'll leave it in the paint can at the truck stop, and then they'll take the truck somewhere else, offload it, come back, put the tracking device back in, and then it looks like nothing has happened. Or there's some technology out there that will manipulate where it says the truck is, right? So the truck could actually be in California, but it looks like it's moving across the country. We've also seen them take the tracking device out and put it in a car, and they'll have the car drive the route that is expected for the delivery, right? And they'll actually have that car pull into the parking lot of the consignee and hang out there for a little while, or drop the tracking device there. And don't misunderstand, this isn't intended to convince you that a theft didn't take place. It's just to convince you that a theft didn't take place yet.
Right, giving them some time to...
So they're just trying to gain some time. So you're in the middle of an argument saying, no, I have the tracking records. I can show you that it was delivered, right? I have, it shows that it's there. It shows that it's at your location. And you have the consignee saying, no,
it's not here.
It's not here. It's never arrived. And then 2 days later or a day later, you realize that they manipulated the tracking. It's not necessarily new, but it's becoming more frequent. So, anytime something becomes more frequent, it gets talked about a bit more. But it is a real problem. I always teach our clients redundancy in tracking is important. So if you have the ELD, that's a tracking device, but there are some of these groups that use nefarious means to spoof that as well, right? So you have that. You should have tracking in the trailer itself, and you should have tracking in the cargo. You want to have redundancy in that type of technology. And that doesn't guarantee you 100%, but technology is what I call the third layer of a three-layer process in prevention, right? So if you're talking about technology, it should enhance what you're already doing. And I think if you depend too heavily on it, if you automatically think, I bought this technology, whether it's a vetting technology on the strategic theft side or tracking technology on the straight theft side, if you think that that's going to solve everything, it's just not.
And so what are some of the main things that, if I'm a trucking fleet manager, what can I do to help prevent cargo theft?
So from a straight theft side, when we work with our clients, we teach them that it's a three-layer process, and that first layer is always based on good process and procedures, right? You have to have good process and procedures in place. And there's a long list of that. An example of some good process and procedures is educate your frontline staff on cargo theft, right? Don't concentrate the knowledge on cargo theft in just your risk manager or your risk department, right? Or if you have a theft prevention department, right?
The safety department isn't the one getting the emails about.
That's exactly right, and they're not the ones that are taking the fraudulent driver's license at the warehouse and things like that, right? So you really need to educate your frontline staff. They are your best line of defense, right? And then your second layer would be hard locking devices. Good high security rear door locks to marry the left and right door on the back of the trailer. Landing gear locks if the trailer has to be parked somewhere or the truck has to be parked somewhere. Air cuff locks if the tractor is married to the trailer. And then that third layer would be the use of technology like tracking, like we talked about. If you're talking about strategic theft, then it also starts with that same, good process and procedures. Educate the people that are actually dealing with the bad guys who are calling them pretending to be a legitimate carrier. Teach them the red flags. Here at Logistic, I spend a lot of time going with clients and teaching them red flags, right? That's our intent, is to go out and teach our clients red flags. And you want to train that frontline staff on that so that they're better prepared for those kinds of attempts. And then reward behavior, encourage behavior within your own ranks, right? Get your team psyched up to spot those types of things. And when they spot one and they thwart one, highlight that. And then you get into your own, layer two would be the TAPA freight broker security requirements that give you that complete foundation for how to vet your carriers and prevent strategic theft. And then that third layer would be the use of technology, right? Some of these technology-based companies that are out there that help freight brokers vet the carriers and look, much deeper at the carriers to make sure that they're legitimate. So everything is a layered process, but it all begins with, people always say, how much money am I expected to invest in this? Well, the good process and procedures part is free, right? So that's always the beginning. You always start with good process and procedures, and that part's free.
There's some time involved in getting that done, but I'm sure a good return on your investment of time there. You mentioned red flags. What are some of the biggest red flags that you tell fleets to watch for?
I'll give you one example. We tie this in with what you asked about earlier, the phishing emails and the social engineering emails, right? They're really good at making email addresses that look legitimate, right? Instead of an M, it's two lowercase n's next to it, right? Or they'll put a dot in between something. The supply chain works on speed, right? How fast can I move this freight as efficiently as possible, right? And so they will create these emails that look so close to the actual email that you're used to seeing. And if you just slow down for a second, there's been so many times when I look at an email address and I'll say, here's the difference, here's the change, right? And it's just one little thing off. So training your staff to look for those types of red flags. They say that they're in North Carolina, but you're using a vetting process, or you're looking at some of this technology that says no, all their inspections are in the Southwest, right? But they're saying, I can pick up a load in North Carolina, but all the inspections that show for this company are in the Southwest. Like just Google some, right? So we'll see a load assigned to somebody that doesn't even have any trucks. They have small flatbed trucks, or they have Sprinter vans or things like that. And if you just Googled the company, or used any kind of a web search to search the company, you could see that they don't have the equipment, or that's not what they do. They're a plumbing company. We've seen instances where it gets assigned to a plumbing company that has a CDL because they have big trucks, or it gets assigned to a moving company when it's legitimate big freight that is not going to be put in a box van. Things like that. If they're telling you that they can move 6 loads, but you go on their FMCSA profile and it says they have 2 power units, how are they moving 6 loads for you, right? I mean, the industry still is seeing too much of the basic mistakes in that way of not spotting some of those really basic red flags. So, as a whole, the industry just needs to do a little bit better. But I want to make sure the message is positive. We are seeing a lot of that. I mean, when you look at the increase in membership at TAPA, it's not people coming just to come, it's people coming to learn, right? And we're seeing participation now when we have our conferences. You look at the national summit, the National Cargo Theft Summit that we have, every part of the supply chain shows up now. It's shippers, brokers, carriers. Whereas in the past, we were either shipper heavy or it was brokers, and the shippers would leave it to the brokers or things like that. Now everybody's showing up and they're all trying to cooperate. They're all trying to work together.
All right, great. Well, Scott, thank you so much for taking the time to talk today about cargo theft.
Thank you very much for having me.